So, welcome to another Warrior1Spine webinar series. It's been really amazing, and today Pascal's going to be leading us into the lumbar spine. We'll be going through the coupled motion patterns of the lumbar spine and the radiographic measurements that we should be looking at, and the corrective protocols, and how to predict lordosis correction. And once again, I just want to thank Pascal for doing this. But I just want to take a moment and just reflect. I know that there's so much research that are available to us compared to before when we were going through it at an early age, and also many of you and I myself are passionate about this, and we're passionate about spinal reconstruction. We train hard on it. We dedicate our whole lives to it. Ultimately, most of you guys do. And the reason being is because of the stories. Many of you are chiropractors. You guys are doctors at the leading edge of spinal reconstruction. And what got you into chiropractic is a story, your own story a lot of times, or a mom or dad story, or a sibling story. And it's actually what defined the rest of your life. And so that's why stories are so important. I myself, I'm one of those weird guys that didn't have a chiropractic story prior to going in. Never saw a chiropractor, never got adjusted before even attending chiropractic college. So if you have never been adjusted prior to attending, it doesn't actually negate the fact that you can still go huge without a story. But along the way, you start to just fall in love with those stories. I know it's exactly the stories is what got me into going into principled chiropractic, going into forcing myself to go into upper cervical clinic as an intern because of the stories. It's actually what led me to, and Yuri too, it was what led us to actually seeking out Don and Deed's research, in the 90s. Because of the stories of the curves coming back and the lives being transformed, and how that came about is because the stories of how Dr. Al Bragg was actually reconstructing spines. He was actually fusing spines into lordosis with his MS patients, and he is actually getting major change. Although very major surgeries, but he's still getting major change. So those stories led to Don and Deed going deeper and deeper, and so stories are so important. And so I just want to go through a few things here. So as a reminder, all of these episodes now, probably 3 years worth here, are all uploaded on the Warrior1Spine YouTube channel, including the last two, the couple motion patterns of cervical spine and the thoracic spine, the hyperkyphosis webinar, and the new one here. And we work really hard. The turnaround time between presentation of this webinar and upload to the Warrior1Spine, we try to keep it under 2 weeks. So it happens very quickly. So this is a great tool, but I wanted to step into it like even another level for you guys. So I want you to subscribe to the Warrior1Spine's channel, because it actually allows you to get the notifications as soon as something's uploaded to the Warrior1Spine channel. And also with the YouTube algorithm is that as soon as you get the notification and as soon as you interact with the video, it actually pushes it out more to the world. And we're going to actually, part of what we want to do today is just, start to realize, like one of my last talks, I talked about how, BJ started, his, Wonders of Chiropractic radio station, and how Ronald Reagan was one of the first announcers on the radio station, and how he was pushing out stories. And what's available to us right now is we can reach massive amount of people with the story of chiropractic spinal reconstruction. And you can have your own radio station, okay, i.e. YouTube, okay, right on your clinic page, right? So I want to go into a little bit deeper into that. Now, something that's new, if you've been on the Warrior1Spine YouTube channel, something that's new is that you've actually seen a lot of short videos go up. And this is exciting because it's something that you guys have been working on, and you guys have been pulling triggers where you're actually sending us your patients' testimonials, and we're uploading at the Warrior1Spine YouTube channel. And they're very, very powerful testimonials. It's really, really awesome. And it's really having an impact in terms of people being able to hear from people going through spinal reconstruction. It's one thing to hear it from the doctor. It's another thing to actually hear it from the patient. And so this is really exciting. So it's new. You guys can check it out. It's on the shorts. Now, what we're also I'm helping people get aware of is, and this is all like, new to me within the past, year and a half, but I just wanted to show some of the guys. So after one of our last Q&A calls, Warrior Q&A calls, we were talking about starting to shoot stories and patient testimonials. And so Daryl Thompson sent me a video like shortly after, within like an hour or two, and he says, I just did my first video. And his first video, I posted it, and I think it's close to like 1,000 views. Then he sent me another one, and I posted this one, and this one got 837 views, okay, within an hour to 2 hours, probably about an hour and a half, which is amazing, right? So there's 1,000 people now listening to Brenda's story, 1,000 people more than if Daryl didn't take 45 seconds. And why is the story so important is because this is how it started through COVID. I wanted you guys to do stories and focus on stories, because going through COVID and the craziness of the lockdowns and all that stuff is, how do you get a chiropractor back on track? The fastest way to get a chiropractor, a principal chiropractor, back on track is, regardless of what's going on in the world, is to focus on what's going on the inside of the world, your clinics, and focus on your patients' stories. There are literally miracles happening before your eyes every single day that would, like, literally the world would see it as miraculous, and we see it as just, hey, this is what we do. This is just day to day. So how easy is it for us just to walk by miracles every single day, because we just encounter it all day long? But that's not what's happening in the world. So what we want to do is step into these stories, take that minute and step into a patient's story. And what it does is it gets you lit on fire. It gets the patient lit on fire because they can speak and share their story. It also deepens their roots within your practice. They become the biggest referrals. Once they see their video, they start flipping out their video and say, hey, look at what I'm going through. Maybe you should check him out or check her out. But it's huge, right? And so here again, that's why you want to go to Warrior1Spine, hit subscribe, so you can actually see these stories start popping up, these shorts under a minute long, and you guys can start engaging with it. But it goes beyond that. So this is next level, okay? When you go to the Tactical Training Center, okay, and so remember, you go to your Tactical Training Center, you go to your own dashboard, so you hit my dashboard, and then you could go to Warrior1Spine. And all the videos, all the teachings that Dr. Pascal has done over the past 3 years are all there. And you can download it right off there. And so you download it, and all of a sudden you upload it now to your YouTube channel, to your YouTube clinic channel, so that you can actually put down, spinal research, spinal reconstruction research, Dr. Pascal Breton, Warrior1Spine, and you actually have it. You have it on the segments, on your playlist segment, on your YouTube channel. So all your patients can actually see that you train. If they want to see the research, they can see it. I'm actually getting messages too from around the world from from people actually engaging with this research. Like, there's non-specialists that are engaging with the research, and it's giving hope. And we can build this more and more. But so that's been there for a bit. But what I want you to do now is focus on, you go into your practice, get the inside story out. So it's called Storytelling Your Practice. So if you go under dashboard to hit that course, what you'll actually see now is that you'll see all these stories uploaded to that area, okay? So all the stories that you guys have been sending in, they're uploaded. There's actually 8 stories there right now. And from Get the Inside Story Out, your practice, from that channel on the Tactical Training Center, you can download it immediately and upload it to your shorts on your YouTube channel, okay? So you can download it. So because what's amazing is that you can use other doctors' stories, because it's not about the doctor, it's about the story, it's about the patients, it's about the reconstructive chiropractic spinal reconstruction stories, okay? And you can upload it to your channel, and you can imagine, okay? So I upload some videos. Say there's been, I think there's like 1,300 views, okay, in the past, 2 weeks. But let's just round it off. Let's do something that we don't do in chiropractic. We'll round down. Say it was 1,000 views, okay. Say it's 1,000 views, and we have, 5 videos that you're uploading to your channel, okay. So five new videos. 1,000 views, that's 5,000 views to your channel, okay? But imagine we do 5 videos, or let's say like do 10 videos from doctors around North America, 10 videos, okay? Now follow this, 10 videos times 50 weeks is 500 videos. 500 videos of patients' transformations, patient stories, 500 videos that we can directly upload to your YouTube channel. 500 videos. Say it's 1,000 views. That's 500,000 views within a year. You guys get it? So I want you guys to start engaging with it. I want you guys to start engaging with your patient stories. Don't walk by the story. Take a moment. Fumble through it, and then you should see Daryl's video. And listen, Chocheck, okay, Chocheck, he gave me, I had to create a logo for him. The guy didn't even have a clinic logo, so I had to quickly create a clinic logo. Chocheck, if Chocheck can send me 2 videos, actually he sent me one 2-minute long video, which I had to do all the editing for, but by the way, anyways, it's a great video. If he can do it, you guys can do it, okay? You just step into it. You just take your iPhone and just go, hey, go. Let's go for it. Show me. Okay. Tell me the story. And it's amazing. So, but there's a little bit of rules now. Okay. I'm just going to help you out. So with Brenda's story, so what I did with, I gussied. So this was the second video that Daryl sent me. Gussied it up a little bit, slapped on a couple logos. But this is the key though. When the best thing to record, use this. It's great. Okay. But for YouTube Shorts and IG Reels, we want it under 60 seconds. Now, actually, to be on the safe side, it's better to actually have kind of like a 56, 57-second video. Anything over, it's going to post to your channel, but it's not going to go under your shorts. And people are really into the shorts and the reels. So you want to keep it under 60 seconds. You want to shoot it in a 9:16 ratio. So a presentation size is 16:9. You want to shoot it in a 9:16. If you're using your iPhone, it's going to automatically do a 9:16 video, okay? Now, you also want to save it in a 4K or HD MP4. You don't want to do a dot move, okay? It's because a dot MP4 is very, very condensed with the megabytes, so it's a lot smaller size. You can actually move it around. You can upload it, download it a lot faster. You can see through it a lot faster, so that's great. We want to be patient focused, okay? Now, I don't have a problem, we have some videos where the doctor's kind of doing this interview. That's great. That's awesome. But what we're seeing, the uptake is really, the biggest uptake is when the patient's talking directly to the camera, okay? That's what we're seeing the biggest hits with. And make it professional, okay? So professional, you can see this background is awesome. It's high tech. He's got his tables there. You can see it's a high tech practice. So make sure you are aware of your background. Make it professional. Now, I don't want you to text me these videos. Some of you guys have been. It's good. That's great. But I'm getting like all these dings every single day. Okay. So we want you to send the videos to info@warriorcoaching.global. Okay. And how we want you to send it is, well, I want you guys to use WeTransfer or Transfer Now. It's free. It's really, really easy. You just, Google, WeTransfer, and then you just, download, you upload your video and you send it away, and we'll take care of the rest. So send us the videos. You guys are doing awesome. Thank you, Clarice. You totally engage with it. Chochek, you engage with it. Daryl Thompson. There's also Leo Kwan, and there's a few other people that have sent me videos, but I haven't been able to go through them because I'm getting too many texts. So do it this way, and we'll be able to get through them, and we'll upload. I would love to be able to upload like 10 a week, so that we have 500 videos a year going throughout multiple clinics throughout North America and hitting, half mil views. And just the stories are going out with the chiropractic spinal reconstruction. It's going to get you on fire. We need more doctors on fire for the profession. It allows us also to see students watch these videos, and maybe students in high school not knowing what their calling is going to be, but they might see some videos and say, maybe I'll go to chiropractic because of all these amazing stories. So just get it out there. It's all about the story. Now, one more thing, you guys probably saw some posts. We got to see some new Warrior gear here. Okay, we got the authentic 3-color snapback. Okay, they're limited quantities. Okay, so here again, let's go back a little bit. If you want some, okay, go to info@warriorcoaching.global. I think Chochek, he texted me like at 5 a.m. this morning, and he says, save me an orange one. Okay. I'm not getting all these texts, and I'm not saving all these hats. Okay. So as of right now, the orange one, Chochek, is not saved for you. You actually have to go through Sandy at info@warriorcoaching.global. But I appreciate the full outness. Send me some more videos. Now, my video is a little glitchy. I actually didn't do that on purpose, so I'll just go through it. So I'm wearing the Back in Black snapback. Okay, these are awesome. I'm a lid guy, love lids. The boys are lid guys. So I'm very, very, how would I say, picky about my lids and the fit and stuff like that. So these are original snapbacks. Okay, you can get the black one. We got the classic white one here too. Okay, snapback. Okay. Ponytails go through the top, okay? So they're perfect. And we've got the vintage. This is a really hot one. We got the vintage Warrior orange one, orange on orange, really sweet. I don't know really sweet cap. So if you need some lids. Oh yeah, another thing, why I'm sharing this, we're not bringing them down to camp. So if you want them, you have to order them before camp, okay? Because we're not crossing the border with the product. And I think there's more product to come in the next few weeks, and I think I'm done. And here is the lumbar spine with Dr. Pascal.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, guys. Okay, here we go. So today we're continuing on with our coupled motion theme so far this year. So I see a lot of reoccurring faces. I was kind of looking through the room there to see who was joining, and I see a lot of names and faces that I recognize, which is awesome, because the whole reason that we're doing these is to ideally build and add value every time. My goal is to get maybe a little bit deeper into spinal correction and present some slightly more advanced concepts. And some of the concepts we're going to go through today are probably as advanced as we've discussed. So I'm super happy that a lot of the docs that are on here have been watching these consistently and hopefully following along. And I'm hoping that this is all going to put it together in terms of the coupled motions. So this is our last one of the coupled motions of the spine. We did cervical spine back in, I think it was March. We did the thoracic spine in May. And today we're going to talk about the coupled motions of the lumbar spine. Okay, so coupled motions of the lumbar spine, it's the same idea. We're going to be talking about what happens to the curve when the curve translates anteriorly or posteriorly. Okay. And so it's going to be affected by things like the pelvic incidence angle. We're going to look at what's normal in terms of curve magnitude and sacral base angle for any given patient. And so from there, we're going to put it all together as to how things look and when should we be doing corrective exercises versus maybe using a lumbar dental roll versus maybe using a posture regainer. Okay, so let's dive into it. So we've done all these measurements before, and as Dr. Ed alluded to, you can find these webinars on the Warrior One on the YouTube page. So if I'm going through these measurements quickly, if this is one of your first webinars, there's a reason I'm going through them quickly. It's because you can go back and find these on previous webinars that are video recorded where we're going through it in more detail, okay? One thing I want to point out is that when we're talking about sagittal plane correction, sagittal plane being when I'm looking at you from the side, anytime we're talking about these corrective protocols in the sagittal plane, you have to assume that we've already looked at the anterior plane, the coronal plane, and that the coronal plane is fairly normal. In other words, there are no large shifts. There's no, significant imbalance or scoliosis. The AP plane is quite normal, okay? And so the 4 measurements that we're really going to focus on and review briefly today are the anterior posterior thoracic translation. Oops, sorry, I want my pen here. The anterior posterior thoracic translation. And remember, thoracic translation is measured in the lumbar spine. The thorax moves anterior or posterior to the pelvis. 2 is the total amount of curve, the lumbar curve. 3, the angle of pelvic incidence, and 4, the sacral base angle, okay? We've reviewed all of these in the past, so I'm not going into detail. I just want to quickly touch on them because then we're going to talk about how do we estimate lumbar curve. We'll talk about the coupled motions and ideally put it all together. So here, I think if you've done these webinars with me in the past, you've seen this that is circled in red. What this is describing is the elliptical shape of the lumbar spine. The lumbar spine is different than the cervical curve, that it is not a piece of a circle. The lumbar spine is an ellipse. In other words, trying to draw it freehand, less curve up top, and then it goes to more curve down below. So the majority of the curve in the lumbar spine is truly at the very bottom. The sacral base angle, very important, okay? The sacral base angle is right here. It's the base of our sacrum. It should be tilted 40 degrees to horizontal. Okay, so we have a 40-degree sacral base angle, which is our normal value. Our lumbar curve, when we measure it from 1 to 5, again, if we recall, it should also be 40 degrees. So it makes it very simple. In a perfect world, the lumbar curve and the sacral base angle are at a 1-to-1 relationship. Okay, and just like we have the pizza angle, if you remember in the cervical webinar, we talked about the PTSIA, right? Pizza angle, which was a measurement of a patient's given morphology. We have a very similar value in the lumbar spine called the pelvic incidence or angle of pelvic incidence. And that is measuring what the pelvic ring looks like. And that tells us what would be normal for a patient's sacral base angle, lumbar curve, but it also helps indicate whether or not that patient might be translated anteriorly or posteriorly. So the average in the literature is 56 degrees. Pelvic incidence angle, 56 degrees. Now, for some of you, if you're new and you haven't done these before, remember, I'm not measuring these on all of my patients. I put the dots on the bones, on my x-rays. I'm using a measurement software that spits out all this data for me so I have it. So I can review briefly how we measure the pelvic incidence, but understand that if you're doing high volume corrective care practice, you need a software that will measure these for you, okay? So pelvic incidence angle. So we have the sacral base here. I would take the halfway point on the sacral base and I'm going to draw a perpendicular down here. That perpendicular, okay, again, at the halfway point from the front of the sacrum to the back of the sacrum. I'm going to join that with another line that bisects my femur heads. What do I mean by bisect? I would pick a dot at one femur head, a dot at the top of the other femur head. Same thing, I measure the halfway point. So it's like halfway point between the femur heads, joins the halfway point of the sacral base, and this here is a perpendicular. I measure that angle. In a perfect world, it's 56 degrees, plus or minus a couple of degrees. So I have my pelvic incidence, I know my sacral base, and my lumbar curve. Lastly, now we want to know, what does the anterior or posterior translation, how does that come into play? Well, if I have a pelvic incidence angle that is way above 56 degrees, naturally, my patient is going to start to translate anteriorly. If I have a pelvic incidence angle that is below 56 degrees, I'm going to translate posteriorly, okay? The larger the increase in pelvic incidence, the larger the translation is going to be forward or backwards, But you have to understand that there is no formula or direct relationship to predict how far backwards they're going to be. Because I know some of the inquisitive minds, they're the ones who are very detail oriented, are thinking, okay, well, what's the formula and how many millimeters are they going to shift backwards? I don't have that formula. As far as I know, it's not in the research yet. But we do know the shallower the pelvic incidence, the smaller the value, the larger the posterior shift is going to be, and vice versa. If they have a value way above 56, they're going to shift anterior. Okay, and that translation, remember, our reference points are posterior inferior corner versus posterior inferior corner. And T12 is here or here. If it's T12 is back here, I draw my line down, right? It is behind my inferior corner of S1. It's posterior translation. If my T12 is out here, I take the posterior inferior corner of T12. I draw that down. That is anterior to my sacrum. It is anterior translation. Okay. Now, predicting my sacral base angle. So predicting my sacral base angle comes from my angle of pelvic incidence. So on all of my x-rays here, you guys are going to see PI. PI stands for pelvic incidence, which is the same thing as angle of pelvic incidence. They are acronyms. We've seen this formula ideally in the past. I want everybody to take out your phone. You're going to calculate this with me. So take out your phone, because we all have calculators on our phone. You could take a sacral base, you could take the pelvic incidence angle on any given patient, and if it's spit out by your software, so here it's 58, which is almost bang on perfect 56. So if I take 58 and I multiply 58 by 0.63, it's going to shoot out a value. Okay, it gives me 36.54. Now I add 7.3. Okay, so add 7.3 degrees, and that gives me, whoops, trying to get it centered here, 43.84. Let's round up, you know, the opposite of what Dr. Ed said, let's round up like chiropractors and go to 44. So in a perfect world, this patient would have a 44 degree sacral base angle based on his anatomy, okay? Now, my lordosis should be ideally 1-to-1. So if I got a perfect scenario here, my lordosis, this is what this equation means. It just says L1 to L5. That's my lumbar lordosis. Should be 0.8 to 1.0 of my sacral base. So 80% to 100% of the value of my sacral base. So in a perfect world, my lumbar curve is 44, but as low as 80% would be acceptable. So I take my value that I have here, 43.84, and I'm going to multiply that by 0.8, and that gives me 35, okay? So my patient, this patient can have anywhere from a 35 to 44 degree lumbar curve, and that would be acceptable. So I come over here, sacral base, SB on my x-rays, 44, bang on, right? I told you 44 would be ideal, he has 44. I come up here to the curve, in a perfect world, it's a 1-to-1 relationship, it's 43 degrees, that's as close as it gets, perfect. So I hope everybody would understand that in this case, there is zero lumbar correction to do. This person's sacral base and lumbar curve match their anatomy perfectly. And because their angle of pelvic incidence is almost ideal, that means they should have no translation, which they have virtually none. Posterior inferior corner of T12 is here. Posterior inferior corner of S1 is here. They are almost perfectly lined up, one on top of the other. Let's do a few more examples so this makes sense, and then we're going to tie in the coupling patterns. So, like I mentioned right here, PI is 50. I've done all these measurements, so I'm not going to do them over, but I can spit them out. So if you have your calculator, you can do it yourself to see where they land. So 50 is 6 degrees below the ideal or average. Therefore, this person is going to have a slightly reduced curve and slightly reduced sacral base angle, and they're also going to be shifted backwards or have a little bit of posterior translation, okay? So 50 multiplied by 0.63 should give you a value. Add 7.3, and that should give you a value, if I remember correctly, it should be 38.8. Let's call it 38 degrees for simple math. So if I come here, my patient should have a sacral base angle of 38 degrees, and it is 37.9, almost perfect. A 1-to-1 relationship would mean 38 degree lumbar curve, almost perfect. 10 millimeters of posterior translation, which is very slight, which again, slightly reduced pelvic incidence, a little bit of posterior translation. The sacral base and the lumbar curve are at a 1-to-1 relationship, perfectly matching the person's anatomy. Therefore, does this person need any corrective care? The answer is no. Perfect lumbar spine. I come here. I have a PI of 41. So angle of pelvic incidence is lower. So if it is lowered, it's lowered by 26%. I'm going to, before even doing any math, know that there's a little bit more posterior translation here. There's going to be a little bit lower curve and a little bit lower sacral base angle. So clear your calculators. We take 0.63, we multiply that by 41. Add 7.3, and you should have a value of 33 degrees. I look on my x-ray here, my patient is measuring 22. Ooh, first time in the examples I've given you, now our sacral base does not match our predicted value. So let's look at what's happening in the lumbar curve. 25 degrees. So in a perfect world, remember, it would have been 33, but we're happy with as low as 80% of 33. So take 33, the value you got on your calculator, multiplied by 0.8, that's 80%. And it's probably giving you a value, if I remember correctly, is 26.5. So this patient should have a lumbar curve between 26 and 33 degrees. So the curve isn't far off, but it's still lower than we want on the low end. And the sacral base is lower than it should be. Okay, so here I know right away, perfect. Here's a case where the anatomy does not match the sacral base and the curve. Therefore, this patient does need corrective care. Which protocols? We'll talk about that later. This is not I'm not going to go into details for this patient, but I know this patient needs something to help them. Okay. Now, let's talk about one. I gave you all kinds of slightly posterior translations. Let's look one that has a little bit of anterior translation. Okay, so T12, posterior inferior corner of S1. If I draw two bisecting lines down, I think everybody can appreciate that T12 is slightly forward of S1. 13 millimeters of translation here. Okay, the PI is 54.8. Let's not go through the math because 54.8 might as well be 56. Let's call it, this one should be bang on normal. So she should have a sacral base that is 40 degrees and a curve that is 40 degrees. And based on the fact that she has very little anterior translation, the anterior translation shouldn't really play a role here in how it's changed our curve. So I see a 55 degree sacral base angle and a 52 degree curve. So your spidey senses should be tingling. Here's a case of, anterior translation with pretty significant increase in curve. This does not match the anatomy. This person does need corrective care protocols for the anterior translation component. Okay, so that's how we tie it all together. We know our pelvic anatomy. We know what the measurements should be. We can predict sacral base angle. We can predict lumbar curve. And from there, we can look and go, does it match with what is being predicted in this case? And if it doesn't, well, then we have to understand why. And is it not matching because of large translations, right? Or is it not matching because there's some ligamentous damage? Those are very different. And those we will decide on, okay, well, how do we implement corrective care protocols? So when the spine translates anteriorly, it's going to change shape. And when it translates posteriorly, it's also going to change shape. Okay, so here's an example of a kind of a classic anterior translation curve, and here's a classic posterior translation curve. Now listen carefully. This is the fun part. These coupling patterns are identical to the cervical spine. And I can ask that, and again, the I guess structural minds out there can wonder, or try to answer this question. Well, why would that be? It's very simple, because they are both lordoses. The cervical spine is a lordosis. The lumbar spine is a lordosis. So as they translate in this sagittal plane, forward or backwards, they're going to couple. They're going to do the exact same thing. So as my lumbar spine translates anteriorly, it's going to have flexion low down. So there's going to be an increase in the curve low down. And typically you're going to start to see some flattening or some extension up top. It's the same type of pattern that I see in the cervical spine. And my posterior translation does the exact opposite. I'm going to see sort of hyperextension right here, and I'm going to see flexion up top. So the exact opposite patterns, one to the other, but they mimic or mirror the cervical spine. Okay, so anterior translation, especially very large ones, remember, very large translation can be up to 75 millimeters, is going to cause, number one, generally a flattening of the TL junction, but you're going to have a very deep lordosis with more flexion down below and either flattening or extension up top. And a posterior translation will be the opposite. I will see hyperextension down below with sort of flexion or kyphosis up top. If we look at the literature, it says large translations, remember, up to 75 mils. Okay, so very large translation can change my pelvic tilt. Not quite sacral base angle, but we'll consider it the idea of sacral base angle. We'll see a change in that sacral base angle, of up to 15 degrees in each direction. Okay, and max curve change would be 20 degrees in each direction. So if I've got normal anatomy with a very large translation anteriorly, I could see up to a 60-degree curve. If I have normal anatomy with a very large translation backwards, I could see as little as a 20-degree curve, right? 40 degree in the middle, plus or minus 20 on each end. That's simple. Now the average shift, right? The average translation, not average max, the average translation forward or backwards is going to change our curve by 6 to 7 degrees, okay? 6 to 7 degrees. In other words, 46 would be the average I'll see forward, and then we'll say 34 backwards. That's kind of the average based on normal anatomy. All right. Well, let's go see some examples of normal anatomy. So here we go. So PI of 62 degrees. Here's a classic anterior translation presentation. I've got a deep curve low down with some flattening at my TL junction. I can just catch the corner of T12 here. And then here's S1. Everybody can appreciate that T12 is anterior to my S1. If I did the math here, I would see that this patient's anatomy fits almost perfectly. He should have approximately a 47-degree sacral base angle, and his curve is above, I think the 80% was 37 degrees. So his curve is dead smack as to where it should be, okay? So this is normal for this patient. However, it is a little bit further forward than I'd want to see for a small increase in pelvic incidence, but this is fairly normal coupling patterns, right? A small increase in sacral base angle, a small increase in curve magnitude with anterior translation. So this is what we see in anterior translation, okay? So we could probably do some exercises to help this person come back, but this is just a little bit of exercise here. There's nothing really abnormal about this lumbar curve. And usually if you're taking posture pictures of your patients, you're going to see this in them. So you're going to see the AC joint versus the greater trochanter. I call it the rocket ship posture. It looks like they're going to take off on their toes. Their chest kind of comes forward of their pelvis. It is very easy to see, especially when you're looking at them from the side in lumbar, at them in the side in their posture. Okay, you can almost see and know what their lumbar curvature is going to look like. Oftentimes they will be very flat through the thoracic spine as well, because if you remember, anterior thoracic translation flattens that thoracic spine. Okay, so flexion low down, deep curve low down with a flatter TL junction. Okay. Posterior translation, we said, is the opposite pattern. You're going to have hyperextension, so more curve down below, and then you're going to see the kyphosis or the reversal of the curve at the TL junction. This is normal anatomy here too. Okay, so here's an example of normal coupling patterns, normal anatomy for posterior. So if we take out your calculator, here's 50. Well, we've done 50 in the past in one of the examples I gave you. Let's call it 38 and 38. So he should have a 38-degree sacral base angle and a 38-degree lumbar curve. Okay. But based on those values I gave you, remember I told you max translations can change pelvic tilt 15 degrees. This is not quite a max translation, but it's pretty large, 45 millimeters. So that's approximately 2/3 of that max translation, right? And if I look at his sacral base, it's 28 degrees. Well, ideal is 38. He's at 28. If I think of a max shift being 15 degrees, he's 2/3 of the way back, 10-degree reduction. So one could probably hypothesize that this is actually perfectly normal for this patient. His 28-degree sacral base angle is simply a result of him shifting backwards by 45 millimeters. His curve is 33 degrees, which fits his anatomy, right? There's nothing atypical there. And if we shifted him forward, remember we talked about those 6 to 7 degrees based on a shift. So if I add, even 6 degrees to 33 would bring him to 39. That is pretty darn close to what is predicted for this patient. Okay, so here, same thing. This is not someone that necessarily needs a lumbar dental roll. This is someone that needs to have their posture shifted forward. They just have to retrain the posture. And so this is why I'm presenting this to you, is because some docs might not be taking lateral thoracic x-rays. So if you see something like this, this is where you would say, okay, well, what do we do with this patient? Well, I would do, this is the posture, the same patient. Sorry, let me go back. This x-ray is this patient. So him, this is his x-ray. So if I saw this and go, yeah, that meets the normal coupling patterns, but look at this posture, I'm not giving this patient a lumbar dental roll. This patient needs the posture regainer. Okay, and the posture regainer is this guy right here. So I'd have them doing this Titanic exercise against the wall, and I would have them laying on the floor on this posture regainer just like this. Why? Because what I'm trying to do is have the posture be retrained in a more anterior position to normalize the position of the spine. So when you see the normal coupling patterns in the lumbar spine, when your spidey senses aren't going off that something seems wrong there, it becomes posture regainer. Titanic against the wall, posture regainer laying on the floor. If, however, that lumbar curve was, let's say if we went back to this example, okay, now let me erase all this ink. So if I had seen this, if this was, say, an 18-degree curve, okay, and the sacral base angle, same thing, was 15 degrees, well, those would be both below my thresholds of normal coupling patterns, okay, because remember, max translation backwards for the sacral base angle would be 15 degrees. So even if I had removed 15 degrees to my very max for this patient, right, it would be down to approximately 23 degrees. So if I was at 15 degrees, right away, I would know that this is below my threshold of normal coupling patterns. Same thing, max translation can lower the curve by 20 degrees. This is not quite max, but if it was 18 degrees, that would be at the absolute low end. So if I was starting to get values into the teens for this patient's lumbar curve, then I would not be thinking posture regainer because it no longer matches the normal coupling patterns. That patient would then need a lumbar dental roll. And a lumbar dental roll, ideally with a thoracic support, because we are also trying to drive the rib cage anteriorly as we are improving the lumbar curve. Okay, so that is the difference if you're not taking lateral thoracic films when you're going to decide if this patient is translated posterior. If the anatomy matches and the coupling patterns are normal, give them a posture regainer in the Titanic. If they're lacking low curve, so if they have posterior translation, they have a loss of curve and decreased sacral base angle that does not seem to match the normal anatomy, give them the lumbar dental roll and also the Titanic. If we are looking at a case where the patient had anterior translation, if it was pure anterior translation with no extension, okay, thoracic extension, if you remember, that's where the shoulders sort of lean back behind the lower rib cage. So a pure translation is identical to the cervical spine. Remember, in those normal coupling patterns with pure translation. So if I come back to this guy right here, this is fairly normal coupling patterns for this, right? This is normal coupling patterns. Nothing here other than a little bit too much anterior translation. His curve is matching his anatomy and his sacral base angle is matching his anatomy. But he's shifted a little bit further forward than I want. So I just want to try and retrain that to get closer to my green line. All I'm going to have them do is hold weight on the front end, just like this. And it's just like wearing head weights on the cervical spine, identical. You weight the deformity forward, right? So if I add weight here, it's going to have a compensatory motion where the patient's going to shift backwards. And you have them hold it basically as long as they're willing to. The minimum would be 5 minutes. Ideally, would be 10 to 20 minutes, but that is a long time to hold it, okay? So erase all ink on slide. Let's do this. You've probably seen this video before, but again, watch what happens when I grab this 35-pound kettlebell. Right now, if you look at how I'm standing, my shoulder is pretty darn close to being in front or in line with my greater trochanter, but you'll see that once I pick up this kettlebell, I'm going to shift backwards quite effectively. Okay, it's really good. It shifts me backwards. I just have to hold that weight. And now it's training my core and my posture to have posterior translation. You could have people do this as well, but this is really hard. And you can see it. I'm trying to do a straight translation, but instead of doing a straight translation, I am extending a little bit. So this is tricky. And again, extension simply means that my shoulder, if you were to look at my rib cage, extension is when T1 is posterior to T12, okay? A pure translation would be taking T1 and T12 stacked perfectly and shifting them behind my pelvis. So this exercise automatically gets a bit of extension there. So you do not want that when you see anterior translation. I showed you this young lady's x-ray earlier, okay? She has that one that was 40 degrees is where she should be, but she has 52 and 55. So she has some anterior translation, 13 millimeters, but she has a ton of extension. And I know that because if you look at where the rib cage is going here, without even seeing T1 up there, you could see what 11, 10, we're seeing part of 9. Look how far back it's going. So this is someone that has that really deep, low back curve, but a lot of it is being caused by her leaning backwards in extension. So if you know how to measure extension and you see that on an x-ray, well, now we're going to have the patient do this instead. Okay. So if there's very little anterior translation, so in her case there is, but it's mostly because of extension, you have the patients lay on their back, they lift their legs to help flatten the sacral base angle, and they suck that belly button down to the floor. They are trying to flatten their low back into the floor, trying to basically create the opposite position for the lumbar spine. So these are the two exercises. This is probably the most common that I give my anterior translation patients, especially when the anatomy doesn't match. Again, like this, it does not match. If it's a pure anterior translation, I will do this with them. If it's a combination of anterior translation with extension, I will do this guy. But if it's mostly a case of crazy extension like this might be the only exercise that I give them. No dental rolls are needed. This is just strengthening and flattening the lumbar spine. Okay, so I know that was a lot. Hopefully it wasn't too mumble jumbled together. So as always, here's my contact info. There's a Warrior code that anybody wants to, buy any products to do this stuff in their office, WQ323. It's good for 2 weeks until September 12th, and it's off 10% off any of the dental roll and or rehab products that we have in our office.